previously called SMR, if you've been reading the literature on queens the last few years, which was an acronym for suppression of mite reproduction. And they renamed it because it's so close to the Minnesota hygiene trait. It's different, it's unique, and it's kind of a super Minnesota hygienic queen is probably the best way to put it. I will tell you something I did pick up at the conference in Florida from the USDA Baton Rouge Bee Research Lab. The Varroa sensitive hygiene is a trait that worker bees can have. It's a trait that's that you have in your bees. If you have 10 hives, you have one hive that's probably halfway decent at it, but you don't know that, and you don't know how to select for it to get it predominant enough that it shows up in the bees. But it's just a trait where worker bees recognize there's a Varroa in a capped pupated cell, and they can hear or smell, we're not sure which, that Varroa in there and uncap that cell and pull that pupa out, carry it outside the hive, and take the Varroa mites that are in there and carry them out of the hive. And so it disrupts the mating process of the Varroa, and so the populations can't build up. What they've just discovered at the Baton Rouge Bee Lab is that there's also a trait that some bees have where they, the Varroa, when it comes out of a hatched cell and the offspring come out, they ramble around the hive and maybe feed on some workers for a day or so, but then they crawl in behind a large larvae, a last stage larvae, and wait there for that larvae to pupate and be capped by the worker bees, and then creates its offspring in that cell. And there's actually a trait where the bees will actually take the Varroa off of larvae, and it's a totally separate genetic trait. And so they're trying to isolate that, and this is probably the most exciting thing about that is, you say, well, you have to keep buying these breeder queens, and I'm going to tell you about our queen mothers that we've selected with this trait for this year. You have to keep buying it from Glenn Apiaries in California, who's the one outsourced for this bee lab work on the VSH. And how do you test for that yourself? It's very complicated. You got to go to the lab and break open these cells and count the Varroa, and it's a very complicated process. And I don't know any beekeepers or commercial queen breeders that do it themselves. But there's these new field assay chips where since the honeybee genome has been sequenced, they're isolating these genes, and then they find what geneticists call a marker that's always associated with that trait. And then they can create this little chip, field assay chip they call it. They've got a nice little acronym for that. I can't remember what it is. And you can actually take worker bees' abdomens and smear it on this chip. It may take several of them to do it. And it'll light up and show you in fluorescent colors if this trait or that trait, and they can actually put about 5 of these traits on one chip. And this thing is probably only, 18 months, 2 years away from being technology that you can buy in a bee catalog and get shipped to you, so you can see what your bees have. So that's pretty thrilling, pretty exciting to know that we can start, seeing what now it takes a lab full of researchers to see. So our queen mothers then are going to be from 2 sources. We're going to use some Italian queens that have a hygienic selection background from Kona Queen, Hawaii, that we brought in and evaluated last year. We've got about 3 or 4 of those we're going to use, and we've got one Varroa sensitive hygiene queen that we got from Glenn Apiaries in Fallbrook, California. They're the authorized industry distributor for several of the products that are coming out of USDA bee labs. And I will tell you that if you get one of the Kona Queen Italians, they're real pretty, they're yellow, they're very gentle, and we like the way they produced and the health of them through the fall and the winter last year. If you get the Varroa sensitive hygiene queens crossed with these Pendle queens that have hygienics and BSH, you won't have to treat for mites, but they're a little more aggressive. They're a darker bee and they're a little more aggressive. So you're going to get one or the other. You know, I don't know. I don't know which one you want. Maybe you don't know which one you want. I'll try to stay here. Okay. No, I'm not giving you a choice.
You'll be able to tell.
You're getting a package of bees with a good queen that's got some good genetics, and you just first couple of times you work them, you just might want to wear your veil and find out what you got. So I'm gonna tell it like these Pendle queens are super gentle, and they're big golden queens, and if we were just going to in the old days. We'd have used them for our queen mothers because they're big and fat and beautiful and lay lots of eggs, and that's what I'd really like to raise my queens out of. But and they do have some very good genetic traits in them, and I probably could have. I was tempted to, but we've made the decision to go the other way because we've got a little stronger Varroa hygiene traits in the other two lines, and feel like survival is the key right now in beekeeping. So we're letting go of some of our favorite things we like to do with bees, you know, to try to get a bee that can survive and thrive. Okay, let's see what else we want to do. I mentioned that small hive beetle trap. Maybe if we come back here in the fall and speak to you, we'll talk to you about how that worked. Let me talk to you real quickly about colony collapse disorder. CCD. How many of you don't know, haven't heard about CCD? That's good. What's causing CCD? Dr. Jeff Pettis, probably the person that I would trust the most to answer that question for us today, would throw his PowerPoint slide up here and he'd say, well, here's your varroa mite we've had, and here's your tracheal mite, and over here is all the viruses, the new viruses, and some of the new viruses that aren't as new. You know, this Israeli acute paralysis virus, the virus that you read about, it was the cause of CCD. A year ago, 18 months ago, it was the cause. Well, they're pulling bees out of the freezers now at these bee labs and finding out we've had it since 1985. So it's been in this country a long time. It didn't cause CCD. Maybe a contributing factor. So there's your viruses. Nosema apis has been here for 20, 30 years. Now we've got Nosema serrana, a new strain in here from Asia. It hits the bees at a totally different time of the year, has a little different reaction in their midgut. It's certainly an issue. Is it causing CCD? Then there's migratory stress with, right now there's less than 2 million managed colonies in the United States, commercially managed colonies in the United States, and 1.5 million of them are going to be in California next week. I mean, that tells you something about the migratory stress when bees are being shipped from, not just from Texas, but from Georgia and Florida and from Pennsylvania all the way to California to pollinate almonds. And then some of those bees go from California to Michigan and even Maine to pollinate blueberries, and then maybe back to the Midwest to make a honey crop, or go from there to other pollination sets. I have a beekeeper friend that moves each hive of bees gets moved 21 times a year. And it's all pollination. They get to make a little bit of goldenrod honey in the fall in upstate New York for about 3 weeks. They're making honey. The rest of the year is just sucrose and protein supplements, and move them to the next pollination set, and on and on and on. So that's a lot of migratory stress. So he just puts this big array of all these stress factors and says, you know, which one of these is the straw that breaks the camel's back? The big one that we're all looking at right now is chemicals and the role of chemicals. And so I'm going to tell you one study. You can go home and Google it and look it up. Penn State University has just released a study from their bee lab there. Penn State has done the most research on colony collapse disorder. And they've shown that some of the metabolites, those are the breakdown elements, that's what a chemical turns into when it falls apart, of the new class of systemic chemicals that's being used on all the seed corn and almost all foliar applications on cotton for aphids, and on soybeans and the canola, and just about every managed agriculture crop out there gets some application of this, of something in the imidacloprid or neonicotinoid class during its growth cycle in the growing season. And one of the breakdown components in that, when bees are challenged with that in a lab setting,